Hello, welcome back to CinemaBurger. I'm Scott Berger and I bring you movie reviews from a different perspective. We continue this month with our viewer choice movies, and we continue with the number 3 science fiction movie Hollow Man. It came out in 2000 and was directed by Paul Verhoeven, and it starred Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Shue, Josh Brolin, and Greg Grunberg. It's about a group of scientists who work for the Pentagon and are trying to create a formula for invisibility. Now, this can be considered an unofficial remake of The Invisible Man, and it was pretty interesting for its time. It used a lot of practical effects and low-budget effects. Now, Kevin Bacon stars as Dr. Sebastian Kane, Josh Brolin stars as Matt Kensington, and Elizabeth Shue stars as Lindsay McKay. They are all the top 3 scientists working on this project, with Sebastian Kane being the project leader. Now, what's interesting enough is that they've already figured out how to turn things invisible. The problem is turning things back to being visible by the human eye. Now, they have heat goggles to see people's body temperature so they can see the animals that they've turned invisible. Now, the opening scene of the movie, we see Sebastian Kane in his apartment, and he looks across and he sees a woman coming home and taking off her clothes after work. Now, already we're establishing that Sebastian Kane is kind of a perv and he's a womanizer, but it only gets worse from there. Now, they're working on a way to make things visible again, and Sebastian thinks he's figured it out. So they go to the lab, which is in what looks like an abandoned warehouse and is deep underground. So we meet the rest of the science team, and they've been practicing on a gorilla with the tests. So the gorilla is injected with the formula to make the gorilla invisible. And for the year 2000, looking back 20 years, the effects still mostly hold up. You see the skin disappear first, and then the muscle tissue, and you see the circulatory system, and you see the different layers of the body. And it's pretty well done, just showing how the invisibility works. And then finally you see the skeleton and you see it disappear. And this looks pretty cool, honestly. Now, what's good is that they use a lot of practical effects, and then they add a bit of CG to enhance the effect, and it's not a completely CG effect, so that it doesn't look completely fake. It has some degree of realism, which is what I really like here. So they have a successful test done, and they go to their military contractors, which is the Pentagon. And it's interesting that the government wants this for military reasons. I guess they want to use invisible soldiers in war. Another military subplot about technology gone wrong. So Sebastian and Lisa used to date, and now Lisa is secretly with Matt, so there's a lot of tension between Sebastian and Matt. And basically they have a dick measuring contest in terms of who's a better scientist and things like that. So since the test was done successfully with a gorilla, they want to test it on a human. And since the Pentagon is upset that there hasn't been results since the team didn't tell the Pentagon that they successfully performed the test with a gorilla thanks to Sebastian. So Sebastian wants to be the first, so his arrogance is playing in here. So they want to test it on a human now. So Sebastian is the test subject. So they perform the test and it works, and this scene is pretty cool because it's physically painful for Sebastian. As he's thriving in pain, you see his skin disappear like he's disintegrating, and then you see all his skeletal and muscle systems disappear, and Sebastian has become invisible. Now they do some tests, and immediately Sebastian starts going up behind women and touching them, and this is where it gets really creepy, and it only gets worse from there. So they do tests, and Sebastian starts to go a little crazy with power. After the 3 days, they try to bring him back to being visible, and it fails. So after now 10 days or so, Sebastian has some stir craziness, and he's frustrated that the rest of the scientists can't form a solution to this. they make a mask for him so there can be some sort of normalcy in this lab. Now, since Sebastian is the project leader, he starts to make decisions that serve his own interests versus the whole group. They can't let the world know that someone has become invisible, otherwise the ramifications would be insane. So since the team didn't tell the Pentagon that they performed these tests and went further, Matt and Lisa go to the general and tell them because things are getting out of hand. And the general will pull the plug on this test. Now, Sebastian actually leaves the compound to go get some of his stuff because he's stir crazy and he sees the woman in the window again. Now, things get really creepy. Since he's already kind of touched people already, like some of the women watching him, they take turns watching Sebastian to monitor him, and the first thing he does when a woman is asleep is literally unbutton her shirt and like grab her like nipples. And first of all, wouldn't you feel that even if you were asleep? And two, that's wrong. Like, you're molesting her. You're not going down a good path here. Now, not that they're glorifying molestation or anything like that, and that they make Kevin Bacon's character out to be bad. It's still not good because there's many more scenes of this, especially when he goes to his apartment, he sees that woman again in the window, and he thinks like, oh, maybe I could go touch her. Now, for a second, he's like, no, don't even think about it. But then his 1 second of moral clarity disappears as he says, who would know? And then he goes to mess with this woman. Now, she just showered, she's in a bathrobe. He rings the doorbell, and no one's there. So, he rings it again. The woman opens the door and looks down the hallway of her apartment. First of all, why would you open your door and walk down an apartment hallway in your bathrobe only? And then she closes the door. And then he messes with the mirror she's sitting in front of. And then she gets pushed on the bed. Now, the scene cuts there, but the implications is that he possibly raped her. Now, we don't know this. He says that he only scared her because Sebastian says that he left the apartment and that they find it out that he left. Now, the scientist played by Greg Grunberg also asked Sebastian what he did or what he would do since he is invisible now. And the first thing Greg Grunberg says is that he would go mess with women. Like, why are all men almost in this movie, like, perverts and possible rapists? I had to look up because I wasn't sure if Harvey Weinstein produced this movie. He didn't, but you could have fooled me. Now, almost all of the scenes of Sebastian messing around and being invisible is messing with women or touching women or molesting women. Like, I know they're trying to imply that he's going crazy, but you can do other things while invisible besides touching women, or you shouldn't do that at all. Like, rob a bank, like, steal something. But no, it goes right to molestation, which really is uncomfortable in this movie. It was uncomfortable then, and it's still uncomfortable now. So the rest of the movie, Sebastian realizes that the rest of the team knows that they told the Pentagon that he went crazy and stuff, so he ends up leaving to kill the general who was in charge of this project. Now, all the effects of being invisible while being covered in water or air or any other substance are pretty good looking. Like, Sebastian jumps in the pool to kill someone, and you see the outline of his body in water, and it looks realistic enough. And this came out 20 years ago. The movie really gets creative with showing an invisible person without actually seeing them. The only issue is, at times he gets covered in things, and you all know if you get paint or blood on you, it's not going to all just come off immediately, because essentially Sebastian, to be completely invisible, has to run around naked. So a lot of times he's just kind of running around naked. And also it seems he has like super strength. He's hanging from a pipe at one point to strangle someone who is clearly bigger than him. Now they don't say that this invisibility serum gives you super strength. It just says a side effect could be amplified aggression. I guess with adrenaline that could make you stronger, but I don't know. So now we come to the end of the movie. Sebastian has locked everyone in the lab, and they know he's crazy and trying to escape. So they use those heat goggles to find him, which is smart. So at this point, Sebastian has killed a dog out of aggression, he's killed the general, and he's molested and raped a woman, possibly. So, like I said, I have to check if Harvey Weinstein produced this movie. Because it's really uncomfortable and off-putting, and it takes you out of the movie. Because otherwise the movie is a really cool sci-fi thriller with some practical and good special effects. So basically now Sebastian is going to kill all the crew members one by one. And of course they kill the black woman first. Like, how stereotypical can we get here? And then next is the happy chubby guy. Like, the Greg Grunberg is kind of like the bigger guy, but they kill the chubby guy second. So we're going with stereotypical horror movie kill order here. And then the rest are kind of a free-for-all. Now, one of the scientists needs to get blood to help Greg Grunberg because he was strangled and fell on a pipe and his throat is bleeding. So as a woman goes to get blood packs, he is in the room with her and she throws blood all over the floor so that they can't see where he's going. And of course he's already behind her because he's also extremely quiet when he moves. I guess it would make sense, it's hard floors and he's barefoot, so I guess he could sneak around without being heard. Also throughout the movie they use fire extinguishers to shoot in front of them to see if he's in front of them, because that's also pretty smart. So none of these scientist characters are stupid, they're using practical ways to try to find an invisible man. But at one point Sebastian changes the temperature of the compound to be human body temperature, 98.6 or so, so now that any heat signatures would be misleading. So it's pretty much down to Lindsay, played by Elizabeth Shue, and Josh Brolin, who plays Matt Kensington. So it's the two main characters and the villain left. So at one point, Sebastian hits Matt with a crowbar, so he's bleeding, and they also lock Lindsay and him in a freezer. So what's pretty cool is that if you electrify metal, you can make a magnet, so that's how they use to open the sliding door and they get out. So at one point, Sebastian, to make sure that he's the only survivor and no one finds out that he's invisible and is walking around the world, he sets up hydrochloric acid and nitroglycerin in a centrifuge to explode, so that way they can get rid of the evidence. Now, Lindsay at one point gets a flamethrower, makes a flamethrower, and hits Sebastian with it, and what's interesting is that fire actually makes him partly visible again, because they were having trouble making him visible before. So they're trying to get out and they're hanging from the elevator, and part of the explosion goes off that Sebastian set off. So the elevator comes down after going up, and then somehow Sebastian survived this explosion because as Matt and Lindsay are climbing up the elevator shaft, he's hanging from her leg and trying to kill her again, and while Lindsay distracts him, she lets loose the connection of the elevator and he falls along with the elevator, and then both Matt and Lindsay escape, and then the movie ends. So now, having seen this movie 20 years later after it came out again, some things definitely hold up. The special effects are definitely very well done. They use a lot of practical effects, and they use CG to enhance the scenes, making it not as noticeable. That's a really good thing, since movies now use way too much CG. Now, the sci-fi thriller plot is pretty engaging. except for all of the rape and molestation scenes. Those are really uncomfortable to watch. And like I said, you can show other ways of being invisible besides molestation and being a peeping Tom. And because of those scenes, because they take up, I'm going to say like a quarter of the movie, I have to give this movie a 3.5 out of 5 burgers. If there weren't so many of those scenes, I could give this a higher rating, but unfortunately, there's no excuse for that. So, that's Hollow Man. I definitely suggest this movie to watch. You may have to skip the molestation scenes, definitely. But the sci-fi thriller plot's pretty good, and the use of practical effects are definitely a plus. Now, next time we're going to talk about the number 3 horror movie. I've been Scott Berger, and I'll see you next time.